What is it that distinguishes the sound of one instrument or voice from another? What accounts for the infinite variety of sounds that can be produced? The quality of sound of instruments and voices are influenced by a number of factors that, taken together, produce what is called tone color or timbre.
Timbre is tone quality. You know, when you listen to a sound, when you listen to a musical note, you hear several things. You hear the basic note, but you also hear some overtones. You hear some other sounds that are generated. The particular combination of overtones that you hear gives each musical instrument its own sound. You could play a note, say a G, on a guitar, and you could play that same note on a flute. The fundamental frequency of the note, the G, is the same. But the timbre is not. And what makes the timbre it's the mix of the overtones that you hear along with the fundamental note.
Timbre for me is the very essence of a particular sound, the way that it can be developed or changed in its smallest parts so that it becomes something else. It can be a very pure sound, like, for instance, which is in a timbre very, very pure. And if we start applying different things to it, for instance, we can change the timbre of the sound by just changing the way that we create the sound. And in fact, what I was doing was actually just opening up the vowel sound to explore the harmonic makeup of that sound.
We take instruments to be things that produce tones, but each one of those tones in an instrument is actually a huge complex of smaller tones which we usually do not hear. And many musical instruments take advantage of the overtone series in order to produce musically useful tones. The overtone series is really quite simple. Behind every acoustically generated tone, there is a series of other tones which are happening simultaneously.
Musical timbres are made by combinations of overtones. And you can do with a synthesizer what's called additive synthesis. You can build many overtones together, piling them one on top of another, different 2 times, 4 times, 8 times the frequency. Then you can make sounds in that way. And you begin to see that there are actually many more frequencies besides the fundamental frequency. When we change the overtone structure, we change the sound or the timbre of what we're listening to. Every instrument has its own timbre, its own color, and it's based on its overtone structure.
The most crucial way that timbres are distinguished in instruments is by their general type. Most musical traditions have some kind of arrangement for classifying their musical instruments. In European traditions, there have been certain time-honored divisions between musical instruments. The most significant were set up by Erich von Hornbostel, and this system generally divides instruments into membranophones, those with the skin which are rubbed or struck with a mallet or the hand, aerophones, which set a column of air in vibration by splitting an air column over a sharp edge or by the movement of a reed. There's also chordophones, which have stretched strings. Those, of course, can be set into motion by bows or by plectra or picks. Chordophones have all sorts of different timbres depending on what you bring to the instrument. Another category is idiophones. Those are those instruments that sound like themselves, like a bell. Its entire structural material is its acoustic material. We don't hear the steel in a piano so much as we hear the string and the felt hammer itself. Idiophones sound like themselves. And there's some other categories too. Of course, the new category is electrophones.
Any waveform that you can make in the air, you can make in a wire an analogous waveform. And so you can make music, you can make sounds electronically. An early example of the electrophone was the theremin, where the player moves his hand further and closer to an antenna and changes the pitch of the sound that way, and a second antenna over here changes the amplitude of the sound that way. As the century developed, the electric guitar came into very general use, taking the sound of the guitar and picking up the sound on little pickups, which are like tiny microphones behind the string, and putting those sounds into an amplifier and back out of a speaker. And then, of course, after that, you begin to come to electronic music synthesizers, and on into the future, who knows what will be next.
Timbre is connected with musical instruments mostly by structure of the instrument and the materials that the instrument is made from. It's significant that musical instruments use precious natural materials from all over the world, and many times these were living materials like the sinews or guts from different animals. Wood is my main medium. I've been working wood most of my life, and an instrument maker tries to figure out which of the design aspects of an instrument are mutable and which have to be preserved. And an instrument maker will change something about an instrument every time they build that instrument, but they will leave certain other things alone. In making my own nays, I experiment with wall thickness, with the size of the tone holes, with the shape of the embouchure, with very small, tiny little measurements in order to generate different kinds of tone. Ney is a Persian term meaning simply pipe, and nays in various forms appear from North Africa all the way to Western China in very many different kinds of forms. And the ney that I play is associated with Turkey. It is this shape, this profile here, that is said to give the Turkish ney its particular tonal timbre. But the real place where timbre lives is inside the instrumentalist's heart and head. If the instrumentalist doesn't hear the timbre in the instrument and the music, then the audience won't hear it either.
While materials and construction are critical in determining the timbral capabilities of an instrument, it is the musician who makes the instrument come to life. In essence, the instrument becomes the unique musical voice of the player.
I think the connection that you feel with an instrument is oftentimes beyond literal or verbal description. But I think one thing that really attracted me to the sound of the tenor saxophone was its incredible emotional range. The tenor saxophone can be a very, very tender and sensitive instrument. Or it can be a much more commanding, aggressive, powerful instrument. And I like having those expressive options, and I like having them integrated into the sound of one instrument.
The tabla drums are actually a set. It's 2 drums, or individually called tabla bayan. Together it's called tabla. It's made, the right-hand drum is the tabla, and it's the pitch drum, the high-pitched drum. The left hand, the bayan, is the bass drum. The skin is held on by use of this camel strap, and these wooden blocks are put in to increase or decrease tension. The farther down you hit them, the tighter the skin gets, the higher the tone goes. By pushing on the bayan, we are able to get different tones and modulate the tones. Strike it with the first 2 fingers for the what they call the open sound, and for the closed sound, it's a flat hand slap. Some sounds together would be da, din. Small phrases, dida dida, dage tete, tete katika digina da, tataka tete katika digina da. Very difficult instrument to master, and I still haven't mastered it. I'm an artist and I'm a performer, a professional musician, but my basic view is that I'm studying it, I'm learning as I go, and I feel I have a lot to learn.
The oud is actually the most prominent instrument in Arabic music. It has basically 5 double strings and 1 single low string. And it has a fingerboard here that is fretless, open fingerboard. And this is how the quarter tone quality is being produced, because you can slide and produce all the sounds. Usually the oud is played in the context of a small ensemble or a larger one as accompaniment to a vocalist or as a solo instrument. It's a very old instrument. It comes from the tar family in Persia. It's the ancestor of the lute and the guitar family. The oud is actually the most prominent instrument in Arabic music, and it's valuable as the piano for the Western composer or performer. As far as I'm concerned, this is one of the greatest instruments in the world. It's very dear to me.
Her cheeks were like the lily white that bloom in yonder valley. Oh.
The human voice is perhaps the most flexible of all instruments. The great variety of vocal timbres found around the world are reflected both in how singers render individual pitches and how they place their voices.
There are so many elements that create a particular type of sound that are much more variable than when you are plucking an instrument or playing an instrument in which you have an expected sound. There is some aspect of the voice that is unique to each person. When you're talking about vocal timbre, you need to think about whether the sound is coming from your throat, from your chest, from your head, and it's different from one culture to the other. Of course, if you are a member of a culture, you sing a certain way. And you don't think, oh, I'm using this much breath, I'm placing my voice here or there. You imitate what you hear. And of course, it's human voice, and it will be individual and different from one person to the other, but there are certain aspects of voice culture that are definitely being transmitted within the culture.
The human exploration of timbre is a continually evolving process. Whether the instrument is hundreds of years old or of contemporary origin. Whether a voice is acoustically produced or electronically reproduced, musicians and audiences are constantly defining and redefining the sounds which we call music.